Chapter 4. Zack and Sophie headed back home. The night sky had darkened over their shadows. The wind grew colder with each stride they took. Sophie began to shiver. Zack looked over and noticed her trying to bundle up to stay warm. So he took off his coat and threw it over Sophie's shoulders. Sophie smirked, showing Zack she appreciated his gesture. As the night went on, Zack and Sophie began to notice their surroundings. "Where are we?" Sophie asked, her arms squeezed tight trying to hold in the warmth as she looked around in curiosity. Zack didn't respond right away. He looked around at various things, street names, houses, anything in eyesight. Nothing seemed to look familiar. "I'm not sure." Zack and Sophie appeared to be lost, something that seemed impossible considering they knew the town like the back of their hand. "Let's get back to my house," Zack said, ushering to Sophie to follow him. Back at Zack's, the neighborhood, like the town, looked unfamiliar to Zack. The houses looked the same, but something was different. Zack couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Is it just me, or did you do something different to your house?" Sophie asked. Zack looked over the neighborhood and his house. "No, something's definitely different." Zack and Sophie entered Zack's house cautiously, inching their way into it. The house was filled with smoke, as if Zack's mom once again burned a roast. "Oh, what's that smell?" Sophie asked, coughing her brains out. Sophie tried to wipe away the smoke as best she could. Zack swiped at the smoke as well, proving it was too much for him. "Smells like..." Suddenly, out of nowhere, Zack's mom popped out from the kitchen, holding an extremely burnt piece of food that was too hard to identify.
"Hungry, dear?"
His mom asked eerily. Zack jumped a foot. Her presence took him by surprise. She was dressed down in a yellow and blue printed apron, her hair frizzy like she stuck her finger in a light socket, and the color of her skin faded with dark circles under her eyes. Zack stuttered to answer. No thanks. We were just gonna go to my room."
"Are you sure, dear? A growing boy needs his protein."
His mother replied. "Yeah, I'm sure." Zack and Sophie backed away from her. As they bumped up against something behind them. "A growing boy like you should eat his protein," Zack's father stated, appearing similar to the mother. Dark circles under his eyes, skin color faded, wearing a cardigan with the letter L embroidered on it. Zack looked up at his father, fear stricken in his eyes. No, yeah, I'm sure." Zack made his way around his father, Sophie close behind, as our two heroes desperately climbed the stairs to get away from Zack's zombie-like parents. As they reached Zack's room, Zack couldn't close the door quick enough. "What the heck was that all about?" Zack said with such angst like he was holding in his breath. Sophie sat down on his bed, confused herself. "I don't know, but something definitely weird is going on around here." "You can say that again." As Zack and Sophie tried to calm down, A scratchy noise from inside his closet immediately got their attention. "What was that?" Sophie asked, freaked out. "I don't know," Zack replied. Zack looked around his room and grabbed a wiffle ball bat from his supposed sports days, striking a swinging pose, starting towards the closet. Sophie looked around his room herself and found a stapler and followed Zack's lead. "What do you think it could be?" Zack whispered to Sophie. "I don't know. Maybe it's Big Bird," Sophie replied sarcastically. "Big Bird wouldn't be..." Zack, looking at Sophie like to criticize her comment, only to realize that she was being humorous. "Oh, I see what you did there." Zack grabbed the knob to the closet, slowly tugging it to pull it open. "Ready?" Zack asked Sophie. "Ready." Zack yanked the closet doors open. Sophie and Zack arched themselves, ready to strike. "Millie?" Zack said, as the two noticed Millie, his dog, cowering in the closet. "Come here, girl." Zack knelt down to comfort Millie as she came trotting out of the closet, wagging her tail. "She doesn't seem to be different," Sophie said. "What do you mean?" Zack replied. "Well, look around. The town, your parents, my parents, everything. Everything but Mills. You know what that means, don't you?" Zack asked. Sophie looked at him with curiosity in her eyes. "What?" "Oh, sorry, I was asking. I thought maybe you would know." Sophie shot Zack a look of utter disappointment. After a few moments, Sophie realized something. "There's something here." "Huh?" Zack asked. "If Millie is the same, that means there's some sort of ripple," Sophie said. "Like passing gas?" Zack asked, partially distracted by Millie licking his face. Sophie rolled her eyes. "No, dipwad. Like a ripple in a dimension. Come on." Right then, Sophie, Zack, and Millie left Zack's room. With extreme caution, and not to cause themselves any unwanted attention, Zack looked below the stair banisters to check on his parents' whereabouts. "Anything?" Sophie asked. "I don't see anyone," Zack replied. Our three heroes eased their way down the stairs. When they were nearly home free, Sophie felt a sneeze coming on. Zack, thinking quick on his feet, held his finger under her nose to try and prevent her causing any noise. For a smooth second, they were in the clear. Then, Millie ended up sneezing. Sophie and Zack looked at one another, eyes wide with a strict gasp.
"Kids!"
Zack's parents called out. "Go, go, go!" Zack commanded. Our heroes dashed as quick as they could out the front door, but not before members of the student body and the faculty stood in a horde in the front lawn.
"Going somewhere?"
Miss Hershey asked, menacing. Zack, Sophie, and Millie stopped in their tracks. darting their eyes in every which direction, hoping to figure out an escape route. "Got any plans?" Sophie demanded, pinching Zack's arm. I'm thinking. He replied. Zack looked around and noticed the gate to the backyard was open. "Come on, follow me." Our three heroes raced to the yard, with the horde right on their tails. Well, Millie's tail, that is. Zack slammed the door shut immediately after Sophie and Millie entered. The three of them backing against the yard door, desperately trying to hold the drones off. "What are we gonna do?" Sophie pleaded, her heels digging into the wet dirt. "I don't know." Zack replied as he shook, pushing all his weight against the door. Just when the three had almost given up, Millie spotted something. She nudged Zack. "Not now, Millie." Millie tried once again. "Millie, can't you see?" In that very moment, Zack noticed the obvious answer Millie was trying to get his attention for. "Look!" Zack said, pointing his finger towards a hole under the fence. Sophie followed his demand. She wasn't convinced right away about the idea. "That hole is barely big enough for a mouse. How are we going to fit through it? You got a better idea?" Sophie hated to admit it, but that was the best idea they had. Millie went first, squeezing her little chubby butt in the hole and under the fence. Sophie still had her doubts this was the best plan for action, since it seemed even Millie had her share of trouble fitting through. Zack looked over at Sophie. "Go. I got this. Go, now." Sophie raced over, arching her back, her head seeming too big to get through. "I'm stuck." This was the last thing Zack wanted to hear. He was running out of strength, and there were 4 times the amount of power on the other side of that yard door. He wanted to help Sophie, but he knew the second he stepped away from his post, they would come barging in, and then they would have no way to escape. "Zack, help me!" Sophie cried out, wiggling, trying to get through. As Zack and Sophie seemed to have lost hope, Millie began to dig, like the speed of lightning, opening the hole under the fence, enabling Sophie to get herself through safely. The timing couldn't have been better. Zack's legs started to feel like a gummy worm. Sophie yelled from the other side of the fence, "Zack, come on!" Zack pushed himself off the door and ran as fast as he possibly could, each step getting harder and harder, like he had lead in his shoes. When Zack reached the hole, he instantly fell to his stomach and belly crawled with everything he had. Luckily, Sophie and Millie were on the other side to help him through, and just in the nick of time as the drones broke through and nearly got a hold of Zack's foot. Later on that night, as the sun set on the town of Middleton, our three heroes wandered the streets, looking over their shoulder to make sure they were not being followed. I'm cold, tired, and I smell like wet dog, Sophie states, then noticing the look Millie is giving her. "No offense, Mills," Millie growled. Zack hadn't even noticed what Sophie said. He was so drained, he started to resemble the drones they were on the run from. Up ahead was the local library. Feeling it was a place to rest and clean up, the gang decided to hold up there a while until they figured out their next move. Unbeknownst to them, a figure lurked in the shadows, watching them closely behind. As Zack, Sophie, and Millie snuck through the back door, the sense of eerie wasn't far behind. The three of them took shelter in a little reading room down the furthest hall. Millie curled up on a dusty old pillow in the corner. "I'm gonna go get cleaned up," Sophie said. "No, wait. You shouldn't go alone," Zack replied worriedly, grabbing her hand, holding it firmly. Sophie looked down and noticed his grip. She then looked up at him. "Zack?" Sophie uttered. Zack didn't answer. "I'll be fine." She shook her hand free. "I can take care of myself." The look of worry bled from his eyes. "I know, but..." Sophie turned around to interrupt. "Zack, I said I can take care of myself." "Did I do something?" Zack asked, confused. Sophie chuckled. No. You just brought on the apocalypse. It wasn't my fault." Zack pleaded. "We always said we wanted to be ghost hunters." "Yeah, when we were kids," Sophie relayed. "Remember, we still are kids." Sophie sighed. "Things are different now." "How?" "We're in middle school now, Zack. We're supposed to be worrying about getting good grades, acne, and dating, not fighting some otherworld ghost." "Are you dating?" Zack asked, with a clear sense of worry in his throat. "No, well, kinda. I don't know," Sophie muttered, lowering her head. "Sophie, you either know or you don't." Zack stood in front of Sophie as he has done many times before. This was the first time that he felt like he was standing in front of a complete stranger. Sophie lifted her head up to face Zack. Tears had begun to well up in her eyes. She quickly looked away to wipe the tears. "Will asked me to a movie this Friday, which I doubt will happen now." Zack couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Will? As in Will Wheeler?" Sophie still couldn't look him in the eyes. "My mortal enemy? How could you?" "Oh, come on. That was years ago. We were rubbing glue between our fingers at the time. Will is a different guy now." "I can't believe what I'm hearing. My best friend and my sworn enemy?" Sophie interrupted. "It's one date, and it hasn't even been a date yet." "Well, I hope you and Will are happy together. Just so you know, that was sarcasm," Zack shouted, pouting as he crossed his arms and sat down in a chair on the other side of the room. Sophie rolled her eyes. "Grow up, will ya? It's not like we were gonna be together forever." Zack had never heard anything as terrifying as the words that just came out of Sophie's mouth. He turned in his chair to face her, but she was already halfway down the hall headed to the restroom. Millie got up from her spot to comfort Zack. Then, Sophie had found a bathroom just a few feet down the hall. She looked herself over in the mirror, running her fingers through her stringy, dirty hair. Ugh, gross. Sophie turned the water on in the sink and started to wash her hair as much as she could. A creak in the floorboard around her caught her attention. "Hello?" she called out. "Zack?" No one answered. Sophie stepped out of the bathroom to have a look. She saw no one in sight. Zack continued to pet Millie as time seemed to pass at a snail-like state. He noticed Sophie hadn't come back yet. He looked back towards the hall where the bathroom was. "Sophie, what's taking you so long?" Zack called out. But no one answered. Zack stood up and started towards the bathroom. "Are you going number 2? 'Cause if you are, I would like a fair warning, please." Still no answer. When Zack finally reached the bathroom, he immediately noticed the door was ajar. He pushed the door open lightly. "Hello?" Zack called out. No answer. He continued to look around, checking underneath the stalls. She was nowhere. As Zack figured maybe she had ventured off, he slipped in a small puddle of water by the sink. That was peculiar. Sophie wasn't the type of person to leave a mess, he thought to himself. Suddenly, Millie! Zack raced back to the reading room to find Millie. Millie was gone. Hey everybody, it's Griffin O'Connor, creator and narrator of ZACK vs the Paranormal. I just want to thank you guys again for tuning in to episode 4. We only have 2 more left. I want to just make a special announcement. Next week it will be a back-to-back premiere, so you will have episode 5 and episode 6 all on the same night. So that might be a lot of listening to, so I totally get it if you guys break it up into 2 different nights. But next week we will conclude the season finale of ZACK vs the Paranormal. And speaking of that, originally ZACK vs the Paranormal was to be a very one-time limited series based off of this little boy that I happen to know who's very near and dear to my heart, Mr. Zachary Little Nelson. And I wanted to do it just kind of as a special thing for his birthday and just a cool writing and creating exercise for myself. It seems to be picked up by audiences. Seems like a lot of families, a lot of people really dig it. So, now I'm kind of in the consideration of bringing it back for a second round. But I need you guys out there in podcast land to let me know, comment, subscribe, message, and let me know why do you think it should be an ongoing thing. I definitely think it's a great series to create, and there's a lot of room to grow with it. But let me know. Let me know what you guys think. So anyway, yeah, thank you guys again for listening, and stay tuned for next week at 8 p.m. Pacific time. I know I keep saying that, and I swear to you, next week it will be on time. But episode 5 and 6 next Wednesday, same ZACK time, same ZACK channel.